Dismantling contemporary deficit thinking. What is deficit thinking? An example, a student fails in school because of the deficiencies or internal deficits to their genetic makeup, class, culture, and family socialization. Ruby Payne, Deficit Thinking in Class and Wealth. Ruby Payne proclaims herself the leading U.S. expert in the mindsets of poverty, middle class, and wealth. She has traveled to many countries, speaking to many different audiences about the issue of deficit thinking. The first theme being poverty. The author talks about culture of poverty notion, deficit thinking idea, asserting that the poor are makers of their own material disadvantagement and deprivation. Culture of poverty, not only an adaptation to a set of objective conditions of a larger society, also once it comes into existence, it tends to perpetuate itself from generation to generation because its effect on the children. It also allows a depiction of poor people with self-imposed transgeneration problems. Another theme being blaming the learning for failing. There's language differences, dropout rates, teachers demanding more income. It is also about whether the student wants to learn or not. A teacher has to want to teach and the student has to want to learn. Not all students are alike, and so not all students are going to be successful in the same ways.
At-risk schools. Relationship between teacher quality and student performance, inequality of distribution of economic resources. At-risk schools create at-risk students. Schools themselves place students at risk for school failure. Researchers show that low-performing schools have more teachers that are not fully certified, have little or no experience. Nationwide, there is a significant salary gap per teacher between schools with few students of color and schools with the most. School failure. Failure purely as a result of child rearing patterns. Conception of the war of poverty, way of life, who they are. Studies wanting to correct the social, occupational, and psychological deficits of people born and raised to a life of poverty. There's a common stereotype that we assume poverty is who a person is, not just their environment. Banfield states poverty is individualistic, a state of soul rather than a condition of society.
Breakdown of underclass population. Underclass meaning isolated from society, deviant, alien, the poorest of the poor. Aletta broke down underclass population into 4 groups. The first one being the passive poor, which is typically long-standing welfare recipients. The next one being the hostile, which is terroristic street criminals, often drug addicts. Number 3 being the hustlers, those who gain their money in the underground economy but seldom carry out violent crimes. And lastly, the traumatized, drifters, homeless, drunks, individuals released from mental institutions. Aletta focused on the deviant, pathological behavior of underclass individuals rather than examining systemic and structural factors in the larger society that led to such significant economic and living conditions for the immensely poor.
Seemingly, the Central Fall High School, located on Rhode Island, is the perfect example of deficit thinking, as it covers the different sections like intersectionality of race, poverty, school failure, and blaming the learner for failing. 75% of local population lives in poverty. According to an article by CNN, Central Fall High School is one of the lowest performing high schools in Rhode Island. It is in a community where the median income is $22,000, census figures show. As described earlier, poverty essentially leads to a school failure. Rhode Island High School had a 50% graduation rate, which ultimately led to the school failure. CNN was one of the sources that recorded and described this event as a school board in Rhode Island has voted to fire all the teachers at a struggling high school, a dramatic move aimed at shoring up education in poverty-ridden school district. According to the article posted by CNN, of the 800 students, 65% are Hispanic, and for most of them, English is a second language. Half the students are failing every subject, with 55% skilled in reading and only 7% proficient in math, as said by the officials. The teachers of this high school use the racial differences of the students that speak English as their second language as an excuse to lower test scores. This way, teachers are somehow blaming the students for not being able to speak English proficiently because they're from a different racial background.
Policy imbalance. Standardized tests, part of an American education since the mid 1800s. 2002's No Child Left Behind Act mandated that animal testing must be in all 50 states, an example of policy imbalance as it promotes the concept of one fits all. Standardized testing has not improved student achievement. They are unreliable measurements of a student's performance and very unfair in discriminating against racial backgrounds. This just goes along with the saying when you have a fish, a lion, a bear, a turtle, and they're all asked to jump up and climb the tree. Not all of them can climb the tree because not everyone is not the same. The first article being The Evolution of Deficit Thinking, Educational Thought and Practice by Valencia Richard. Deficit thinking is said to be the notion that students, usually low-income minority students, do not pass in schools because they, along with their families, experience deficiencies that obstruct the learning process. Second article, Beyond Deficit Thinking, Providing Access for Gifted African American Students. This article addresses about gifted education. Black students in gifted education are unrepresented. Orientation held by educators allows access to diverse students to be accepted into the programs for the gifted. Intersectionality of race. Imbalance between the number of white teachers versus African American teachers. Blacks being accused of being violent just because of the color of their skin. Whites believing that they have superiority over all other races.
I agree with the contentions of the author, creating equal access to an optimal learning environment, instilling a sense of competence in all students, building a learning environment focused on effort to encourage all students, project-based learning, making the classroom safe and secure, eliminating the discomforts, relevance of the lesson content, spurring hope and learning, engagement and creativity.